Okay, so Will, let's talk a little bit about Pete Hegseth. A lot of people have been talking about Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
There are million. I respect his service, right? I know you do as well. There are millions of people that have served that I think would be more qualified than him. We can get into his checkered past. We don't have to dive deep into it, but I think it's very troubling from a decision-making perspective. Cheated on your first wife with your second wife. Cheated on your second wife with a Fox News coworker. Had a child with her. Cheated on your third wife. A lot of, I don't know whether he's an alcoholic or not, so I don't even want to talk about that. But the fact that he ran a business into the ground already with less than 100 people, that's also troubling. Am I wrong in being
That's not my understanding of what happened with that business at all. I mean, I have a colleague, Mark Lucas. This is a Concerned Veterans for America. I don't believe, I'm pretty, in my understanding with Mark, who was a high-level official of the Concerned Veterans of America, before he came to the Article 3 project, he said Pete did a wonderful job and was very competent and and that their organization was actually very effective. I mean, it was primarily like a policy advocacy organization on behalf of veterans. They got a few big pieces of legislation passed, is my understanding. So I think this reporting, this certainly on that front, I just don't think it's true. I think it's just wrong. Somebody that's like a smear. As for his personal conduct in his marriage, I don't think that's anything to admire. Obviously, I don't think he would say it's anything to admire. But at the same time, what's good for the goose is good for the gander here, guys. I mean, Tim Kaine made a huge deal out of that during his speech in the confirmation hearings.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, 3 months ago, he was on the campaign trail gleefully hamming it up with Doug Emhoff, who impregnated his nanny and forced her to get an abortion while married.
No, I saw that. I saw you tweet about that. I wanted to actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about that. So obviously, as you know, Doug's not in any administration.
Sure.
Doug's not running for, Doug's not going to have the nuke codes. We all know that there's only two people in this country that would be Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump. So, as far as Doug's past, sure, he has a checkered past with women. I don't think any reasonable person would deny that, but he's also not running for Secretary of Defense, right?
Yeah, but I mean, he's the first, he's still also, he'll be in the White House. He would be the first husband. Right. And that's not
could have been the first husband.
That's a hugely influential position. And you're putting somebody who's, voluntarily in a marriage with that. I can't, I'm sorry. The left's, the way that the left treated all this stuff, and this isn't new. This has been going on for decades. This is all the way back to Bill Clinton, who was credibly accused of rape. Right. What's good for, I'm sorry. I can't take the Democrats seriously on this front as the arbiters of moral,
I can only speak. I hear you, Will, and this is why I wanted you on to talk about this. I don't defend Bill Clinton. I would never vote for Bill Clinton. I'm going to say this on the record. I believe Bill Clinton in his life has done some very bad things to women. I certainly would not deny that. Okay. I also did not vote for Hillary. That wasn't the reason why. There were other reasons, but I just don't think Pete Hegseth is a good guy. His own mother called him a woman abuser. Now I understand years later, she goes on Fox News and cleans it up. She never denied that he never abused women. She said he's a different man now. So my question to you is, why is it all of a sudden Donald Trump chooses him to be his Secretary of Defense and then he finds God? Why is it people find Jesus and they all of a sudden find God like they lost their wallet and they found
I don't think that's an accurate characterization of Hegseth's religious kind of. I'm not a religious person myself, so I don't.
Neither am I. Neither am I. Right.
But it seemed like it. I'll take his, newfound, awakening seriously. I don't think it's, I didn't start this year. It seems like, the conduct that was in question was something like 2017, 2016, I don't know, something like that.
It was years ago. Yep.
That's a long time ago. So I give him credit. I think it seems like he's been happily married, and the conduct that he was engaged in 7-8 years ago has stopped. Good for him. And here's the other thing. I'll say this about Hegseth too. And I think in the confirmation hearing, one of the things you saw was he does have a lot of talent, right? The guy's very, very articulate, very, very smart, in great physical condition, which I think is a good thing for somebody who's the Secretary of Defense. I think there's something to be said for the guy who's running our military and expects the standards all the way down the line to be held up for that guy to be capable of cranking out 250 push-ups in a morning. That's a good thing.
He's in good physical condition. I certainly, he's not very good at throwing axes. I think we all can agree on that. He's not very good at that. All right, let me bring this up because I also find this interesting, right? As you know, he said on a podcast in the past that he did not want women to be on the battlegrounds, right? Which I find repulsive. I think it's absurd what he said back then. All of a sudden,
specifically in combat,
right? Correct. Specifically in combat, which I absolutely disagree. There are some tough women out there that are much stronger than me. Now, all of a sudden, he changes his tune. All of a sudden, when Donald Trump chooses him, he goes from, I don't want women serving on the battlefield in combat to, I'm open to it now because he has a meeting with this female Republican who was not going to vote for him. And now all of a sudden is because he changes his mind. I'm not buying it. I think the only reason why he changed his mind is so he can get affirmed. That's my opinion. Where am I wrong?
Politics. Welcome to politics. Sometimes you come in with a set of beliefs,
right?
And you're told that, if in order to, you're going to have to make some compromises along the way. I mean, I disagree with your premise, at least when it comes to frontline combat roles. I don't think it's appalling to suggest that, at least with frontline, infantry and artillery roles, that, a flat ban on women is probably unnecessary. But the number of women in the country who could probably meet, say, for example, the Navy SEALs fitness standards and would have the willingness to do it. If you actually understand what those standards are and and combine that with the willingness to do it, the number of women we're talking about is probably single digits.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
Right? And that might be, it might be small single digits. We're talking like 1 or 2 women in the country who might be
well, I don't know if it would be that small. I'm not an expert, but I don't disagree with you that there would be more men that would be able to be qualified.
I guess the analogy would be, think about there's 2 big sports analogies that I like to bring up in these conversations, right? The first is the fact that, the under 15 men's soccer team, like an under 15 club team, beat the women's national soccer team.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And when there's also the example of when Serena Williams and Venus Williams challenged
absolutely
top 300 tennis player and got smacked around 6-1, 6-2.
Right.
So there's sort of the gap, especially at the top level, between men and women. Once you start, is extremely dramatic. And so yes, there's much. Obviously there's women much stronger than you or I. I don't
disagree with you. That's why you don't see any women that are playing in men's professional sports because they don't have the abilities to do so. And I would welcome it if they want to try. But all I'm simply saying, and I think we sort of agree, is that there are probably some, might be few, but some women out there that could pass those challenges. And if they're willing to serve this country honorably and risk their life, then I don't see any reason if they can pass those standards to do so. And I didn't like his comments on that podcast. And but I think we agree as a whole. And I don't disagree with your sports analogies at all. I talk about that all the time. It's why I don't think that transgender women should have any place playing with naturally born women on the playing field. I think it's absurd. And even though there are only 10 or 15 college athletes that are trans women, over 6,000 athletes. It's still wrong, right? And I don't think.
And the funny thing is, actually, there's an interesting. I know we're a little sidetracked, but there's an interesting, how one single trans athlete in women's volleyball completely collapsed the entire conference's volleyball schedule. I don't know if you remember that, but it's
I do. Are you talking about San Jose State?
San Jose State, right? It's every single team that conceded and was no, we're not going to play with this person. It's actually dangerous for us, right? This person's spiking a volleyball in our face.
I don't disagree with you. And this is where I agree with Republicans on this issue. And by the way, most Democrats, I think, probably agree with us, right? There might be a small percentage that don't.
I think this is an 80-20 issue. I think you find the hardcore left would disagree, but most.
I think most of us agree on this. But let me ask you a question. Just as we agree on this issue, I think what Nancy Mace is, and I know we're kind of getting on a tangent here, but I think it's a good conversation. I think what Nancy Mace is doing, tweeting hundreds of times about a female colleague using a female restroom, and talking more about those issues than gun violence.
Female, right? Male, but you trans.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about someone who is born male, transitioned to a female, whatever. Listen, I consider a man if he's born a man. I consider a woman if she's born a woman. But I will still call you he, she, because I don't care. I will respect you, and I don't know why people care about that. But Nancy Mace sees this as such a threat. And my argument is, Show me evidence that a trans person in a bathroom is more likely to commit a crime than anybody else. There's no evidence to back that up. Now, I know she says, well, it makes me uncomfortable. Guess what? There's a lot of things in life that make us uncomfortable. It doesn't mean we should ban people for doing things. And I get frustrated with somebody like a Nancy Mace, because when it healthcare, gun control, thoughts and prayers, one tweet, let's move on to the next. But when it comes to women in trans women in bathrooms, she's literally still talking about it. It's been like 2 months.
I mean, she wants to make it her pet issue. I think it's a reasonable thing to do. Honestly, I'm sympathetic to women who say that, we fought a long time for female only spaces and variety of contexts, and something we're going to give them back. I mean, I think the proper way to evaluate the trans rights movement is it's the most successful male rights movement in American history. It's the one movement that has the effect of eviscerating many of the protections that women benefited from for many years. So I don't begrudge her doing that. And I think, so, the funny thing is, you mentioned this thing where it's like, you're like, okay, you believe in the biological binary, but then when you want to be polite to people and respect them by their pronouns, which that is actually the position I used to approach it with. I don't do that anymore. I've actually affirmatively changed my mind to say, like, this request for politeness is actually 95% of the time the sort of tip of the spear for in essentially assessment that you ought agree with my political viewpoint on this question. And so I think that
I guess for me, I just really don't care. It doesn't affect me. I would ask you, like, how does that affect you negatively in your life?
I mean, the cultural things, like, you see this starting to happen. You see it happen dramatically in Canada, and then starting to happen in places like California, which is essentially the states enforcing affirming gender and affirming gender parenting. So, they're trying to do this. They actually did try to do this in California. I think they might have passed it, which says that, if there's a divorce and there's a question about custody, judges should weigh which parent is affirming their child's gender and determining who to award custody to. I think it's appalling, right? I think that's the state getting in there and actively encouraging and putting their
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that either.
I think that the right, I mean, and also I think that, underlying the concession there is a concession that this notion of gender is meaning and carries weight. And I think that as a society, we ought to be pushing the notion that you are quite correct that gender, as you've defined it, is a social construct, which is why we're going to ignore it, right? We're going to ignore whatever you're like. You think you're a woman. That's fascinating. You're obviously biologically female, so we're going to call you. We don't care what you've invented for personality for yourself. That's not going to dictate how others interact with you. So
people don't. Yeah, you don't have to call somebody or he or she. I would never say that you have to do that. Just from my personal standpoint, I don't care.
The thing is, like, that's a goal of the trans movement. They want to get to that point. They did it. They were pretty close, darn close in Canada. And so I think it's, I was open to this, and then it is amazing. It's like one of those things where you think, oh, this slope is, slippery slope's a fallacy, right? Wrong. Actually, a lot of slopes are slippery. This one turned very, very slippery in about a 5-year period where, it went from, oh, you should probably be polite to what's your objection to like males bashing in women's skulls?
Well, I guess, what are we going to do though? Are we just going to check what's in everybody's pants going into a women's restroom? I think you would agree with me. There are some trans women you cannot tell based on just seeing somebody walking around, whether they're a man or a woman. So do we just make assumptions about people? Do we ask people to take their pants down, which obviously I would never want to.
I don't think anybody's saying that they need to take their pants down. I'm sure that, someone can figure out a more elegant enforcement mechanism if one becomes necessary.
I don't know how would you do that? How would you do that?
Like, but I think you start with social. I mean, but that's actually a good answer to, like, why social opprobrium? Why should we, I think one way is just to say, as a society, we think this is silly, and we're not, and so, no, I'm not calling you by your pronouns, right? Like, and anybody who tries to correct me on your pronouns, like, you just
people are entitled to do that. I wouldn't take that right away from anybody. I guess
I get that, but it's like, I think people ought, right? Like, I affirmatively have changed my mind. I'm saying, I think it is the right thing for society for people to reject others' attempts to impose preferred pronouns on them.
I hear you, Will. I think there's a lot of things that are right for society that people don't do. For example, I don't want to tell all women what to do with their own bodies, especially those that are raped or victims of incest. And my problem with so many on the far right is they're so hung up on this issue, like a Nancy Mace. But when it comes to, in some states in this country, almost half the states in this country, abortion's illegal. Okay. And then in some of those states, there's no exceptions. I think that's sick. And I think that's far more sick than what anybody thinks about, who's going into bathrooms. We're going to force a woman that's raped to have a child. We're going to force a woman that's been the victim of incest to have that child. I think that's sick. And another one of my issues is, a lot of people, not you, but a lot of people talk about drag queen reading, about how the sky is falling. And I ask these people, all right, can you name me a child that's ever been killed with drag queen? Of course they can't, right? They claim all these children are being indoctrinated. Well, I understand that. They're saying that children are being indoctrinated, but I never hear far-right Republicans say, don't go to church. Thousands of kids have been victims of horrible sex crimes in churches, but I never hear Republicans say, don't go to church.
Public schools. I mean, I'm not a religious person, so I'm an awkward defender of people of faith, but I'll still do it here. I think that yes, young, churches and schools are the first primary places where people who are interested in abusing kids look to. I don't think that's a reason to abolish public schools necessarily. There might be reasons here in public schools. I don't think that might be the one.
I'm not saying that either, for the record. I'm not saying we should abolish church or schools. All I'm simply saying is they want to abolish drag queen reading. And I've never heard of one story of a child that was dramatically changed for the rest of their life by listening to a drag queen read a book to them. But yet I never hear them talk about church and the thousands of kids that were molested.
I cannot fathom the mindset of someone who wants to dress up in what I think is a fundamentally sexual costume and read to children. I think it's bizarre. I'm sorry. I can't be sympathetic. I'm not sympathetic to drag queen story hour. I think it's a bizarre performance. I think parents shouldn't bring their kids to that sort of thing.
But Will, you know what I would say to that? If you have kids, I don't know if you do. If you do, don't bring them to drag queen reading then.
Right. But it's also do we open up it so that children can go buy pornography?
No, that's illegal.
It's obviously illegal. That's right. Illegal. But I understand it's a sliding scale a little bit, but those two are closer than maybe I think, maybe,
drag queen shows
corrupting the youth and preserving children's innocence, preserving their exposure to sexual content is something that I think we
but I hear what you're saying,
and we don't have a libertarian perspective.
I hear what you're saying, Will, but drag queen reading to kids, there's nobody taking their clothes off. At least that would be against the law. Drag queen shows are 18 and over and 21 and over, and I agree with you. No young children should ever be anywhere near that. I'm with you 100% when it comes to that. When it comes to pornography, all I'm saying is, we live in we're supposed to live in a free country, right? If parents want to bring their kids to drag queen reading, I went to one of those because I wanted to see what it was all about. The one I went to in Las Vegas was nothing sexual at all. Kids were eating, they were having fun. The only message I heard was be happy with who you are. And I don't think that's pushing anything on anybody. Now, if your position is, hey, I wouldn't want to bring my kids to that, I would never take that right away from you. I don't think anybody should be forced to take their kids to drag queen reading. I just wish that some people would be more focused on more issues that maybe are more prevalent to children.
I think there are more important issues out there, obviously. I wouldn't say this is my number one or my number two or my number 10. Right.
But, so what would you say to Nancy Mace then, that's tweeted about it 500 times in the last month?
She's a representative. She gets to pick her issues, and this one actually is relevant to her personally because she, there's suddenly a trans person in the House that is trying to use her bathroom, and she really doesn't like it. And she's like, no, okay, I understand. And I mean, it's it's a House rules issue. It's not it's actually tangible for her in this context. So I understand why she's focused on it.
Understood. Go ahead. Sorry if I interrupted.
No, I was finished my point.
Cool.